Much for having me, and all of you for coming. And it's a little known fact that the wall back there is movable, and it comes in just so that a few people have to stand, which creates the optimal size room. When Cass and I should say Cass is my co-author is a distinguished legal scholar, possibly the most distinguished of his generation. And when Cass and I sat down to write this book, we had two goals that I call the ambitious goal and the ridiculously ambitious goal. The ambitious goal was to take the research on psychology and economics that I and others have been doing for the last 30 years or so, and try to apply it to some of the most important problems facing our society today. So that was the merely ambitious goal. The ridiculously ambitious goal was to try to create a new way of thinking about politics that is neither left nor right. We never thought we would achieve that goal, but it's good to have ambitious goals. Although I must say that my 2 weeks in London has suggested there's a glimmer of hope that we may actually make some progress on the ridiculously ambitious goal. As some of you know, I've been tangentially involved with the Obama campaign, and on the day I arrived here in London, Mr. Cameron gave a speech about nudge, so maybe we are somewhere between the left and the right, if there is any difference between the American left and the UK right. Before we begin, I have a special RSA quiz. This is like one of those number series problems that you have on the SAT. A free copy of Nudge to anyone who can guess the name that follows in this logical sequence. And I'll come back to the answer shortly. So the approach that we advocate in this book is something we call libertarian paternalism. At some point when we were describing the book, we thought we would title the book Libertarian Paternalism is Not an Oxymoron. We were assured that our sales would be in the single digits. Both words are extraordinarily unpopular these days in America and around the world. Calling it liberal here only serves to confuse people, but it's equally unpopular, whichever word you use. And the term is thought to be contradictory, an oxymoron. But we think both terms are lovable and can logically be combined. So by libertarian, all we mean is choice preserving. So all the policies I will describe keep people's options open, and people always have the right to choose. And we use that word to modify the word paternalism, by which we simply mean helping people achieve their ends but as judged by themselves. So if, when leaving the building, somebody asks you for directions which way I should walk to the nearest Starbucks, if you point them in the right direction, then you are a paternalist, according to our definition. We do not try to tell anybody what's best for them. We try to help them do what they think is best for them. We think it's possible to achieve these goals with something we call in the book choice architecture. Now, the most important point I will make today is that there is no alternative to choice architecture. It's not possible to design a neutral choice architecture any more than it's possible to design neutral architecture. Someone designed this building, and one reason that we started a couple minutes late is I went off to the toilet and then got lost coming back. I can tell you it's confusing back there. But it's not possible to design a building that's neutral. It has doors, it has stairwells, and so forth. Choice architecture also has to be something. Consider the following example that we use to motivate the book. The head of the London School District cafeterias discovers that the order in which the food is displayed influences what the kids eat. What use should she make of that information? She could arrange the food in such a way as to make the kids healthier, say by putting the fruit in front of the desserts. But she needn't do that. She could try to make the kids as fat as possible. Perhaps her kid is a bit chubby, and she's tired of the other kids picking on him. She could arrange the food at random, thinking that's a principled way of avoiding a particular choice architecture, though, of course, she's fooling herself, since that is a choice architecture. She could feature the items for which she gets the largest bribes. This is just a short list of possibilities. She must choose something. And some designs are better than others. Now, here's a brilliant design. This is my favorite example from the book. This is a picture of a urinal in the Amsterdam airport. Now, it just looks like a dirty urinal, but the speck you see is the image of a fly. Now, the fly is a bit too high. I'll tell you a little bit of interesting psychology. If I ask Matthew to reach up and touch that fly, why don't you do it? Now, now no one will want to shake hands with him. There's a psychologist, Paul Rozin, who studies these sorts of things. If you make chocolate in the shape of a cockroach, no one will want to eat it. But anyway, it turns out the idea of putting the fly in the urinal like that was the idea of an economist. It's probably the best bit of economics anyone has ever come up with. And it has reduced spillage by 80%. It turns out that when men are doing their business, they're not paying a lot of attention. But if you give them a target, they will aim. I'm sure that there's an evolutionary explanation for that. Perhaps Steven Pinker could tell us what it was. Oh, that's 10 pounds. Pinker could tell us what the evolutionary explanation is, but all we know is that it works. Now, that fly is a nudge. A nudge is any small feature in the environment that attracts our attention and alters our behavior. We can nudge for good, as in this example, or for evil. There's a company in the US that sells extremely fattening and delicious cinnamon buns, and their marketing strategy is to pump the aromas from the ovens out into the street, which acts a bit like Ulysses' sirens and draws people in to eat those buns. Now, we have a book on choice, we have a chapter on choice architecture in the book that really is the structure of the book. I don't have time to talk about all of the ideas. Let me mention a couple briefly. The quiz. The quiz. Did anyone guess Tim Harford? Now, probably not. These are speakers that have preceded me in this lecture series in the order in which they are displayed on the RSA website. Now, you might wonder how that could be. It turns out they're displayed in alphabetical order by first name, except the first two are under the Right Honorable. So naturally, Al Gore and John Denham appear before Thomas Pogue and Tim Harford. Now, I would suggest as a bit of choice architecture, this leaves something to be desired. And we can do better than that. One example of choice architecture is defaults. A default option is simply what happens if we do nothing. Now, normally what happens if we do nothing is nothing happens. But sometimes something happens. So if I leave this computer alone for long enough, the screensaver will come on. How long it takes for that to come on is itself a default option. Most of you have left that one alone because you don't know where to change it on your computer. And the most important lesson we have about default options is that they are sticky. So choice architects, the first thing they need to think about is what will the default options be, because whichever ones you pick, people are likely to take. It's the reason that TV networks spend so much time thinking about the order of the shows, because people use what in the book we refer to as the yeah, whatever heuristic. They just go with whatever. And if they're watching one show and another one comes on, even though it's one thumb click to change, they stick with what they have. An important application of this in the realm of retirement saving is we've discovered that if you automatically enroll people into retirement plans, nearly everyone joins, whereas if they have to simply fill out some form, 40, 50, 60% of the people may not get around to joining, or it will take them years to join. This idea has been adopted and will be incorporated in the new national pension scheme sometime soon. A second important principle of choice architecture is to give people feedback. If you're painting a ceiling, you're almost always painting white on top of white. It's easy to miss a spot because you can't see what you're doing. Someone invented a type of ceiling paint that goes on pink and turns white. That guy is a genius, and you don't miss a spot. Something a little more important might be something called the ambient orb. This is a piece of equipment you can install in someone's home. It lights up if you're using a lot of electricity. And simply installing that in the home reduced energy use in peak periods by 40%. In the book, we suggest that might be even more valuable if, when you're using a really lot of energy, it plays some annoying music. We suggested ABBA, but I've had complaints about that. So I think since we're libertarians, I think people should be able to pick their own annoying music. Now, I'm sure you've all been to Paris. The first time I went to Paris and ventured into the metro, you know, you get one of those little tickets, and you stick it in the front and it pops up. And it has a magnetic stripe on one side and some writing on the other side, and I wasn't sure which way to use it. There were no instructions. My French is limited. And so I stuck it in with the magnetic stripe up, and that worked. And for the next 25 years, I was very careful to always put it in the correct way. I was living in Paris for a few months with my wife a couple years ago, and now I'm a native. And I was showing some friends around and said, now, when you go into the metro, it's very important to put the card in with the magnetic stripe up. My wife starts laughing at me at this time, and this is common, so I wasn't sure why. And she said, well, actually, it doesn't matter which way you put it in. Any way works, which explains why for 30 years I had never made a mistake in putting it in. Now, compare that with the parking garages in Chicago, where you insert your credit card when you come in, and then when you leave, you get to some ramp, you reach out of the window, it's on the left side in America, and you stick your credit card into some slot. There are 4 possible ways you can put that credit card in. One way works, the other 3 don't. If you put it in the wrong way, it just spits it back out and doesn't tell you why. And there's often a long queue of people honking at the idiot who is trying to leave. At the Chicago Symphony, they have had to hire people at the garage that's in front of the symphony, whose job it is to put the credit cards in the right way. Otherwise, the patrons of the symphony would be there forever. I am a big fan of the look right signs in London. They have saved my life several times, and it's a perfect example of expecting error and libertarian paternalism. Finally, the idea I am pushing hardest now is something in the book we call recap. I think maybe electronic disclosure might be a simpler way of describing it. Here's the way it would work. You would, say for credit cards, you'd get 2 electronic files once a year. One is a list of all the ways your credit card company can charge you. So if you pay a bill late and they charge you £25 and raise your interest rate, that's in there. If you go to Europe and charge something with the euro and they charge you 3%, that's in there. The second file would be a list of all the things you did to incur charges. Now, what would you do with these things? You wouldn't look at them. I confidently predict websites would emerge that would process those, and they would educate you about how you're being charged, alter your behavior, and facilitate shopping. I think that this would work for credit cards, for mortgages. There would be an electronic file that would explain it. I think this would have greatly mitigated the subprime mortgage crisis, and it would help in a domain I'm going to spare you on, which is the American Prescription Drug Program. Now, let me mention 2 objectives and then close. One thing I'm frequently reminded of, particularly by my Republican friends in the United States, they think I have failed to notice the possibility that our political leaders might be boundedly rational too. So let me stipulate for the record that it has occurred to me that the leaders of governments, even in very large countries, may not be the brightest bulb on the planet. And of course, I realize that we may not want them making decisions for us. So the second argument is a sort of slippery slope argument. And I'm almost tempted, if I weren't a libertarian, I would say we should ban slippery slope arguments because I think they're almost never helpful. But the argument is, well, if we start putting look right on the sidewalk, the next thing we will have is prohibition. I think that's silly. I think we can put look right, save a few hundred pedestrian lives a year, and not slip into prohibition. So, to conclude, humans are imperfect. We need all the help we can get. It's possible. It's easy to improve choices without restricting options. We shouldn't use bans and mandates, just nudge. Thank you.